Hi, I'm Amy Glasscock, Senior Policy Analyst with NASIO, and I'm here today to interview Ted Cotterill, who is the State Chief Privacy Officer for the state of Indiana. So, Ted, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into the role of State CPO.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to share some of our story with everybody. My story is really, I think, a good example of sort of guiding your career trajectory and not forcing it, not requiring some predetermined outcome of yourself. And I really started with some legislative internships with our General Assembly and with a few law firms in town during undergrad, and then went to law school and at IU while working full-time in an information governance and policymaking role. After law school, found my way into the healthcare regulatory space, and followed by a stretch of managing ION.gov, our award-winning, I should say, enterprise web portal. We're serious about that in Indiana. With all of the contracts and the project management that come with that, along the lines of guiding, I really think it's been all of this legal, this policy making, health and tech contracting experience that brought me here this whole time. I've been working in pieces of privacy, pieces of data protection, not realizing that I was really building a career in privacy. So, glad that it's led me here, and now every day is a challenge.
Great. Well, it's definitely been a busy year across the board in privacy. So tell us what's been on the minds of chief privacy officers in 2020.
A lot of things. CCPA out in California and its regulations. Now we're talking in California about this California Proposition 24. That's a potential next iteration of CCPA. The NIST privacy framework came out this year. A revised NIST 853 with more emphasis on privacy. We're seeing, obviously, historically, cybersecurity had a big focus, but now we're seeing privacy being inserted as components to these things. Privacy Shield with cross-border data flows for businesses that are operating in both the EU and the United States. There are a lot of questions there right now. And then, of course, conversations in Washington around a federal privacy law that I think state CPOs particularly should be watching for issues like preemption and the impacts that the feds could have on what we're doing at the state level.
Right. And I should mention that there's about 15 state chief privacy officers around the country. So it's still a growing role, not necessarily new. Some of them have been around for quite a while, but a growing role in the state. So what about privacy in state government?
Yeah, I mean, privacy remains a big issue, I think, from our perspective, for any data-driven state. We're talking here about pressing privacy issues, right? You and I have talked about this before, but Indiana asked, how can we best leverage data across silos to address the challenges that Hoosiers face, those folks right here in Indiana? And I really think if you have an eye on innovation, whether you are a CEO or a CIO, this is a model, ours is a model that you should consider. I'm going to try to convince everybody of that today from both the big data perspective and, of course, the privacy perspective.
Great. So can you talk a little bit about that work that you are doing? I know that your role, you are housed within the Management Performance Hub in Indiana. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so at the Management Performance Hub, or MPH as we call it, the name of the game is Enterprise Data Analytics. So going back to 2017, Governor Holcomb comes into office in the midst of the opioid epidemic gripping the nation, hitting Indiana particularly hard. And he saw the need to leverage connected data to drive decision-making, to drive policy-making. And he really then asked us to formalize the state's data analytics efforts, which did exist at that point, but formalize it into a standalone agency. We worked with our General Assembly to do that, and we have a two-prong mission. The first prong is interagency data sharing. It's breaking down those silos and making interagency sharing much more efficient and, I think, as a result, effective for state government and then ultimately for our citizens. We've worked to change the culture there, and I think the interagency default has now become yes. So previously, when you went to an agency to say, hey, can you share some data? We want to do this thing. Often the answer was no, and then insert regulation here. No HIPAA, no FERPA. We can't do that. The default has now become yes, I think, in Indiana. The second prong is really getting data out there. We call it data to the people. Getting state data that previously was behind this labyrinth of rules and regulations and forms and contracts, getting it into the hands of researchers and community organizations that I characterize it as they have the ability to make the highest and best use of that data. These are PhD level folks at our research universities predominantly that are really looking into important questions that society faces. So one, interagency data sharing, two, data to the people. And those sound good as we talk about it, and it always does. It gives us good talking points, I think. But if a CIO is listening to this, I think they're saying, okay, great. What value did you add to the equation, right? And I think we've achieved some real efficiencies where, and I'll talk about sort of my bread and butter first. We've streamlined legal, negotiated agreements that precede data sharing. These consume resources. They delay the business benefits associated with sharing. If you've got a use case, I want to do this thing with this data to accomplish this outcome. Often, historically, that was preceded by legal negotiations, contracts, memoranda of understanding between agencies that might sit or be negotiated in legal for days, weeks, months, potentially. And I can get into this more later, but we've streamlined legal so that legal's involved but doesn't take up the bulk of the process. We've streamlined technical. We have a lasting analysis-focused record linkage that is awaiting business use cases. It sits there waiting for the next use case, I want to see A, B, and C so that I can accomplish X, Y, and Z, right? It's waiting for those use cases to come in. And then we've, throughout all of this time working with these agencies, we've developed lasting business relationships. And this really goes to the heart of, we don't believe that we're the smartest people in the room. We're the data folks. And we have degrees of subject matter expertise, maybe in health and human services or in education and workforce. But we don't have the depth of expertise that our partner agencies do. So what we've done is to form working groups around various issues. COVID-19 is a great example, where we had the data. COVID-19 happens in March. We have the data sharing agreements already in place. We had record linkage already in place with much of the data that we needed. And then we quickly worked with the governor's office and the State Department of Health and Indiana Family and Social Services Administration to form the Indiana COVID-19 response team, made up of subject matter experts from all of those agencies and others to inform what those use cases would be so that they are driving from a business perspective. We're adding the legal efficiency value and the technical efficiency value.
So when you are using data in this way, there are, of course, privacy considerations, and I'm guessing that's where you come in. So tell us about the privacy issues that are brought on by big data.
Yeah, so recall the two-pronged mission of MPH, right? The breaking down silos, the getting data out there. For us to be successful, we realized that privacy had to be baked in at the outset. And it's actually a former state CISO that during the codification, when we were drafting the MPH enabling statute, he said to me, we need to make sure we create a chief data officer role, somebody to run MPH, and we need to make sure that we have a chief privacy officer role also, because as we share data, we're going to create our own privacy issues that we need to then address, right? So in 2017, we created the CPO role, and I was fortunate enough with some of the experience that I brought to the table, but as MPH General Counsel, to be given the opportunity to lead the development of our privacy program. So as we drafted the MPH enabling statute, we formulated it in a way that complemented these various sector-specific privacy laws, the ones that you always hear. I've mentioned already, HIPAA, FERPA, we have CGIS for arrest data, we have substance use disorder for some of that data that's with our social services agency. We formulated this in a way that it complemented those laws, and it really enabled us to leverage data for research, for analysis, for policymaking within the frameworks of these laws, rather than to try to swim upstream and work against them. So I think the best way to share this is to cite examples of what we've accomplished to this point. And I hope that this is valuable for the state CIOs that are involved and their executive teams that are tuning in. We've had instances of internal exchange of data in the realms of Medicaid, again, substance use disorder, education workforce, arrest, EMS runs, prescription monitoring, and more. So all of this data that previously lived in these various agencies could now be shared for analysis purposes. And this is really where the rubber meets the road with privacy. The things that should be most interesting to the audience. How did we do it? And first, I think CIOs need to know that they need to have a partner in privacy that wants to get things done. Somebody that is trying to find a way to yes. Rely on that individual, lean on that individual to work through the legal hurdles in a thoughtful way. Those hurdles are there for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. We respect individual privacy, but we're also trying to get things done from an analysis perspective that may not have actually been contemplated when these rules and regulations were put in place, often years ago at the federal level. So having somebody that's looking at it saying, how do we get to yes? How do we formulate this in a way that is respectful of these regs but gets us to yes? That's the first key. From there, we started at square one. It begins with a privacy policy. We didn't have an executive branch privacy policy prior to MPH, and we started that rather than to work from scratch. We looked to our Fair Information Practices Act. We asked how we could enable agencies to put these FIPS, these Fair Information Practices, into practice. Things like communicating individual rights with respect to your data, to data subjects, controls around information, life cycle controls around it, privacy management. So we highlighted a lot of that in our privacy policy to start this conversation with agencies around privacy is something that you should be considering. More specifically, flowing from MPH, the next step for us, as I talked about with the interagency data sharing and the getting data out there, was privacy first data sharing and innovation. Often MPH is at the center of state innovation efforts. So I mentioned our enabling statute, which again gave us this general allowance to access agency data. From there, we focused on individual agency relationships and worked to achieve uniformity and, important to the CIO, business efficiency via standardized DSA, standardized data sharing agreement for interagency engagements. So again, I view negotiated agreements as something, they consume resources. When we're trying to achieve a business outcome, we looked at these data sharing agreements and realized often they're substantially similar. I don't know what the percentage is, but I would venture to guess that 90% of the language in a lot of our state data sharing agreements, interagency agreements, was the same. And then we would get down to the real focus of the effort with, okay, what's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? What data is involved? What are the data sources? What are the data elements? And as a result, what flows from that is, okay, what regulations follow it that we have to accommodate? And then if I don't know how to interpret this data, or I don't know what to do next, who do I call? Who's the subject matter expert that owns this data? So what we did is to execute, and this is in the formulation of MPH, it's built into our statute. We execute one DSA with each agency once. And what that allows us to do is have the important conversation of legal and privacy at the outset that puts guardrails around the relationship. So with our Indiana Family and Social Services Administration, which manages countless state programs, Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, substance use disorder, early childhood and aging programs that are really important for the state, we were able to execute that sort of a monster DSA once. And then what that allows us to do downstream is that the business folks get to drive. So when we have a specific use case arise, we capture the data elements, the business contacts, the purpose statement. We capture that in what we've called a project charter. It's a streamlined statement of work that says we're going to look at this data for these purposes. Here are the dates. Here are the people to call. Sign on the dotted line. And often the people that are signing those are business folks, and that's key to part of our legal efficiency, right? Business folks are driving the documentation that's associated with this one share. So that's part of the internal privacy efficiency, I would say, from a legal perspective. Externally, we've leveraged components of that same DSA for external sensitive data shares. So where a researcher wants to access state data to do this thing, right? Those are not lasting. Those are purpose specific. That's defined in Indiana law. They need to be. They don't maintain the special relationship that state agencies do, right? But that is also more efficient because it's essentially a form. It's not a negotiated contract like they used to be. So that's legal. From a technical perspective, I would say this is a big one. We recently launched, and I've talked to you about this, but what we're calling the enhanced research environment here in Indiana. And this is really cool. It's a secure collaboration environment that's built on Microsoft Azure with the intention of expediting research and analysis. And it allows research teams to bring their folks, their group, not just one individual, their code and their data together and their requested state data together in a state-managed environment for the greater good, right? So it enables the use of this valuable state data without us handing it out to a researcher that's going to put it on a server somewhere. We may have legal terms that say, well, it has to reside in the continental United States. Your environment has to meet these standards. But how do we validate that? We had a lot of questions around that, and we previously had a third-party risk questionnaire that researchers and really their cyber teams would have to complete working with our cybersecurity analyst to certify to us or to show us that their environment was sufficient. Our state CIO, Tracy Barnes, and his team and the Indiana Office of Technology, they expend a lot of resources to ensure that state data in Indiana is maintained securely. So if at MPH, a sister agency of the Office of Technology, if we're facilitating handing data out, we need to make sure that that environment is going to be secure, right? So previously, this was this, we tried to make it streamlined, but I think it was relatively arduous, this third-party risk management process that we would have to go through with requesters. So before the research environment, the process was request data, conduct TPRQ, third-party risk questionnaire, which could take a while, execute data sharing agreement. And now it's request data, execute data sharing agreement, access data in state managed sandbox. Made much more efficient, I think a big win from both privacy and security perspectives because of the controls around the data and the nature of the state managed environment. But really it came at a good time. This was a huge win for the COVID-19 response. We launched it just at the beginning of this year, and it enabled this quick spin up of sandboxes for our COVID-19 response team collaboration. This includes that internal working group that I've talked about, State Department of Health folks, social services people, our chief data officer, and people from other agencies. But it also includes those PhD level researchers. We have these talent partnerships with our research universities, our public research universities predominantly, whereby this, PhD epidemiologist person can sit alongside our team and help to inform our exploration of this COVID-19 response, and say, I think this might be a better path for you to go down. You're going to get to this answer more quickly, right? So, talk a lot about the ERE. It is I think it's a story worth telling. It's had a tremendous benefit for us in the COVID space. The last thing that I would say from a privacy perspective, so all of this interagency data sharing happening now, all of this public data being made available, we needed a streamlined way to make public data available, right? To make data that previously was sensitive or somehow confidential, make it available on our Indiana Data Hub. At the very beginning, we partnered with our Family and Social Services Administration, which owns Medicaid as a program, to formulate a HIPAA de-identification methodology. So there are a couple ways in HIPAA where you can de-identify data so that it can just be made public, completely public, not to a protected researcher under a business associate agreement or something like that. Get it out there for everybody. And now we have an academic methodology that for HIPAA data, we can de-identify it in accordance with that. A few people sign on the dotted line that it's done after reviewing it, of course, and then that data can be made public. And it's great for the HIPAA subject agencies, but it's also a framework, sort of a guideline for other agencies that have sensitive data, because HIPAA does have so much guidance on de-identification. So those are a few things. I've said a lot, but those are a few things that, as we've attempted to do big data in Indiana, the privacy issues that arose and sort of how we continue to deal with them.
Great. Well, not that that's not enough, but what else is Indiana doing from a privacy perspective, and what's on the horizon? And then I just want to go back really quickly and note that your enhanced research environment that you talked about is currently being recognized as a NASCIO 2020 award recipient or award finalist. So if folks want to hear more about that, they can go to our awards library after the conference and see more information about that. So what else is on the horizon?
Yeah, we've still got a lot going on, and I'll start by thank you for bringing that up. Thank you to NASCIO again for recognizing Indiana and the efforts. We're putting a lot of effort into these things. We're really trying to live out this idea of data-driven government and making it real and beneficial for citizens of Indiana. So I think the enhanced research environment is a big leap forward. So no, we appreciate the accolade from NASCIO. It's a big deal for us. From a privacy perspective, what else we're doing and what's on the horizon? It's probably a shorter answer, but we know that we're meeting our baseline. I talked about the fair information practices. We're meeting our baseline fair information practices, right? But what more can we do? I talked about the state privacy policy that helped us to start to be an authority on the subject, to start a conversation with our agencies to inform them of their obligations under the law. But we've got some other things going on. The one that comes to mind first is what I've sort of called a privacy and procurement initiative. And more commonly, this would be CSP, cloud service provider terms, CSP terms, or as a service terms for contracts. But a few years ago, we developed this cloud services boilerplate in partnership with our state CISO. And the objective of this was to streamline state tech procurements while enhancing the privacy and security of our data. So in practice, what this is it's 8 or so pages of contract boilerplate that our agencies that, their attorneys might be experts in homeland security or in social services or in workforce, but they may not know a lot about cloud. And they are expected to be drafting and reviewing contracts to store their data in the cloud. What this allows them to do is to more thoughtfully approach that with more uniform terms that I believe more adequately protect the data, which is good from a CIO perspective, from a CISO perspective, from a CPO perspective. It allows agencies, I think, to move more quickly, which is also good from a CIO's perspective. And then from the CSPs, the folks that are outside of government, it allows them to get to work more quickly, right? To get that contract with the state more quickly. Now they're going to have to agree to these terms. But that's been I think that's been a big win for us over the last few years. I talked to you recently and mentioned our NIST-based PIA framework, our Privacy Impact Assessment framework, that we've developed really just this year, and we sort of just put the bow on it. It's based on the NIST PRAM, the Privacy Risk Assessment Methodology, and really it's got two components. The first is, like our HIPAA de-identification, there's an academic methodology that articulates to our agency partners why this is important, why this matters to you, and then how to do it with academic support for it. But then there's a PIA, a Privacy Impact Assessment tool, which is made up of a questionnaire and a risk identification component. And where we diverged a little bit was the application of the risk score followed by a feasibility score. And feasibility is important. This relates to our audience, which is government agencies. And for the privacy folks that are listening in, I think that this is key for you to hear. You've got to meet the real needs of your business users, right? Not just come in and you dictate a bunch of terms or legal requirements and expect compliance. So we looked at this privacy impact assessment and really thought about it from the perspective of how do we make this valuable to state agencies? State agencies, knowing our customer that have limited resources, they're always expected to do more with less. And we got into it and thought feasibility is an important part of this. If we identify a privacy risk, how easy is it for us to mitigate that risk, right? So we want you to attack the easy to remediate items first, if they've got the highest impact. So yes, I can do this. This is low-hanging fruit, and it's going to have a big bang for my buck. Next, I'm going to look at the high feasibility items with moderate and low impact, because again, for state agencies, they're easy to do. So let's get them checked off the list. And then from there, you move to the moderate feasibility items. But again, you start with high impact. We want to address those items that are the big privacy risks first. So we've outlined a prioritization framework in our methodology. We've got one agency done. We're working now just on our second. As I said, we've just rolled this out. So I'm looking forward as we continue to do that to a number of conversations with our agency CIOs, our general counsel, and other agency exec teams to incorporate this into their portfolio, their software development life cycles, right? So on the horizon for us, other than those things, I think it's continue to iterate, find new opportunities for innovation, and hopefully that answer again drives home the point for the CIOs that are tuned in. Look for a partner in data, look for a partner in privacy that is trying to do more to sort of further your state's efforts in innovation. And luckily, with the right teams, we've been able to do that in Indiana.
Great. Well, it sounds like you won't be running out of things to do anytime soon. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for talking with me today about this very important issue, and also a big thanks to SAP for sponsoring this deep dive session.